How many times have you heard in your sales training that you should be asking open-ended questions? Now, asking sales questions are great, but asking open-ended sales questions are the ultimate. And that's what's going to get you the information that you need to be able to close the client. In this video, I'm going to give you over 10 open-ended questions that you probably have not heard before. So get your pen and notebook ready and let's get into it. In sales, there's something called the 80-20 rule. And what this is, if you know what it is actually, comment below and let me know, because most people get it wrong. The 80-20 rule means that the salesperson should be speaking only 20% of the time. So 80% of the time, who should be doing the speaking? The customer or the client. Now, how do you get a client to speak 80% of the time? You might think like, that's a lot of time. How does that make sense if I'm supposed to be presenting my product or service? Well, it makes sense on a number of different levels. The first reason is that when the client is speaking, it allows you to learn all the information you need about them. And the second thing is, people love to talk. And you might think like, no, wait, I don't really like to talk, so that's not necessarily true. On a very basic level, human beings like to talk about themselves. So if you're asking the right questions, which you're about to learn in this video, you're going to very easily only be speaking 20% of the time. So let's get into it. The open-ended questions that you can ask are in different parts. It depends on where you are in the meeting, or if it's before the meeting, or if it's after the meeting and you're following up. So let's start with before the meeting. Let's say you are on the phone with the client and you're about to schedule the meeting. The best open-ended sales questions you want to ask on the phone include some of these. What do you want to accomplish in the next 6 months? And the way that they answer this question is going to tell you a lot about their goals and what they want to do with the business and where they want to take their business. And it will allow you to figure out how your product or service fits in with their goals and in how many different ways your service will fit in with their goals. So for example, if they give you some of their goals and your services only fit in partially, they might actually not be the perfect client for you. That's possible. Now, on the other hand, if they tell you something where you've already calculated that they will need several packages that you have to offer or several products from your portfolio, you're in a really, really good position with that client because you can help them in a lot of different ways. So this is a great open-ended question just to get the ball rolling and to get a lot of information from them. Another question you can ask, similar to that but in a different way, is what are your biggest challenges? And this will also give you an idea of where they want to go or the issues that they want to solve. Now, keep in mind, a lot of rookie salespeople will say problems instead of the word challenges. You don't want to do that because depending on who you're talking to, you want to use the same words that they're using. And most business people will not use the word problems. Pay attention to that, especially the higher up you go with C-level executives. They will say challenges. The second reason you want to use the word challenges is because it actually has a positive connotation to it. It is something that you can overcome, you can solve, as opposed to a problem is very negative. So stay away from the word problem. What are your biggest challenges? Let them talk. Now, as I'm going through these, make sure that when you do ask the client these questions, make sure you're writing down their answers. Because that's going to, number one, allow you to remember more information. And number two, it will encourage the client to continue speaking. And you can actually check out this video as well. This video will give you some more tips on how you can get the client to continue speaking, why note-taking is so important, and some other persuasion tips. I'll link it in the description below. Another question you can ask before you schedule the meeting is, what is your timeline? And this will give you an indication as to when they actually want to buy your product or service. And of course you want to know that, right? Now, if they say something like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. I mean, we can get started, as soon as I find the right vendor. Well, this is somebody that's obviously not urgently looking for your product or service. And you have to consider whether or not you actually were going to take the time to go meet them and how much energy you're going to invest in them. Because the answer to this question is going to tell you where they are in the sales cycle. So if this is the beginning of the sales cycle and this is the end of it, if they say something like, well, I mean, we can get started anytime, then they're probably closer to the beginning of their research or their meetings with various vendors. And you need to really figure out, do I want to invest time with this client right now, or do I want to invest a lot of time with this client right now? You still might want to. I'm not saying don't. I'm saying you have to figure out what you're going to do and your strategy. Now, you could actually take the strategy of, okay, well, you know what? They're not totally ready, but I'm going to do a killer presentation when I meet them. I'm going to just kill any chance of any other company coming in, and I'm going to get them to close with me right away. Now, if you have certain tactics to do that and you understand how to do that, then do that. But it depends on a few different factors. Now, here's a very interesting question that a lot of salespeople are a little hesitant to ask. But I love asking this question because most clients don't expect it, and it is so good. The question you can ask before you even meet with a client, when you're scheduling the meeting, is, what other companies have you met with? And you might think like, oh, I'm not comfortable asking that. Listen, get comfortable asking it, okay? I'm not teaching okay sales techniques. I'm teaching you the best sales techniques. I'm teaching you sales techniques that you're not going to find elsewhere. I'm teaching you things that when you start using it consistently, your results are going to go through the roof. They're going to be much different than what you're getting right now. So start using them. It's okay, get a little uncomfortable because you're going to get really interesting answers. You're going to find out which of your competitors they met with. How interesting is that? And your follow-up question when you ask them this is, why haven't you moved forward with them? That's a good one, right? Now, this answer is going to give you a lot of detail about what you should not pitch them when you meet them. So you might have very similar products to your competitor, but depending on how they answered this question, you know whether to pitch it in a certain way, to use certain words, to stay away from certain scenarios. They're going to tell you everything you need to know to shape your pitch. Okay, now when you're actually at the meeting, I love to lead in with this question. So, how long have you been here? And you might think, well, I already checked their LinkedIn profile. I know how long they've been there. Now, you'd be surprised how many salespeople don't even do research. Even just checking the LinkedIn profile. If you don't do that, do that. And let's assume that you have done that and you already know how long they've been there. That's not the point. The point is, you should not be making small talk in your first meeting. I know you've probably been taught that by other sales trainers. That's old school sales. Don't engage in small talk in your first meeting unless they do. That's different. But you, as a really good salesperson, should not be engaging in small talk at your first meeting. But when you ask them, how long have you been with this company? That is a very smart way of engaging in, let's call it smart talk. So it's not small talk, it is smart talk. And what I mean by that is, it is somewhat personal, but it's still business, and it's still a great entry point to get you into the core of the meeting. Now, the reason that you want to ask this, even though you know how long they've been there because you checked their LinkedIn profile, is because the way that they explain it to you is going to be different than what you saw on LinkedIn? Now, the follow-up question to this is, where were you before? And the reason that you want to ask this, again, because you probably already know this, because you checked their LinkedIn, but you want to hear it from them. You want to hear the tone of their voice. You want to understand how they perceived it, because on their profile, when you read it, it could look like they had such a great career. But when you ask them this in person, how long have you been with this company? And where were you before? The reaction that you might get, the tone of voice, the stories they give you, will tell you a lot. And so, for example, if they have a very negative response to where they were before, then you don't want to bring that up in your pitch. You don't want to remind them of something that they're obviously have a negative association with. When maybe if you didn't ask them that, maybe you would have continued to reference their old job or something similar to that. So asking them things like this at the beginning of the meeting, it will break the ice, but it will also give you very interesting information about their background, their experience, and what positive and negative career choices they've made. Now, the second question that you want to ask them is, how much do you know about my company? Whatever your company name is. The reason that you want to ask this is because they could have actually done a lot of research about your company. They could know half of what you're about to pitch them already, which makes it a lot easier for you, because then you don't have to waste your energy pitching them half of that information. Now, on the other hand, they could tell you, well, I really don't, I haven't had the chance to really check it out, which in most cases is probably the most popular answer, but you'd be surprised how many times when you ask this question, they have actually researched. They've done their homework. They know some of the things that you offer. The other reason that you want to ask this is because it's going to tell you a lot about how they perceive your company, because perception is everything. So they can have done the research and they know that you can bring XYZ results, but they perceive certain things negatively. So by asking this open-ended sales question, how much do you know about my company? It's going to tell you a lot about what they think and how much they know. Another question you can ask in the meeting is, so when we spoke on the phone, you told me that in the next 6 months, you want to achieve this, this, and this. How has that changed since we last spoke? You might think this is a weird question. The reason that you should definitely be asking this question is because it's probably a few days or at least a week between the time you spoke to them on the phone and the time you're meeting them. If things have changed and their 6-month goals have already changed in a matter of a few days, that tells you a lot about the type of company that you're working with. And that should indicate to you, that should actually be a red flag to you, that what they're going to tell you in this meeting could change in the next few days. So if you leave the meeting and they tell you, yeah, you know what, we're gonna get started, I like this, let's go. And if you don't send them the contract, if that contract is not signed within a few days, there's probably a good chance that things are going to change again, because they've already changed in just a matter of a few days. But if they tell you, no, everything is the same. I mean, these are our 6-month goals. In fact, we've had them laid out for the past few months. I mean, we know where we want to go. That's great. Then you know that this is a really solid possibility that you could win this business if you present correctly. Another very smart open-ended question is, who else is involved in making this happen? Now, if you're meeting with a CEO, you don't need to ask this because CEO can sign off, right? But if you're meeting with anybody else besides the CEO, literally anybody else, you should probably ask this question. And the reason that you want to ask is, number one, so you can find out who they're going to talk to. But number two, you're going to ask this follow-up question. When they tell you, oh, well, the marketing director is involved or the director of finance or whoever, your follow-up question is going to be, okay, what do you think they're going to say? Now, of course, these questions come at the end of your meeting, after you've done your pitch and after the core of the meeting. But these are some of the final questions during your in-person meeting. So you want to ask them, what are they going to say? And the way that they answer this question is going to tell you the objections that those other influencers are going to have. And then what you will do at this point, you're going to take that information and you're going to give that person that you're meeting with a way to respond to those objections. So you're essentially training the person that you're meeting with to respond to those influencers' objections the way that you want them to respond. Now let's rewind a little bit. Let's say that you don't ask this question and you leave the meeting thinking, this is great, this is going well, I'm gonna get this sale. And then afterwards they tell you, no, yeah, our director of finance rejected it, it's not going to work. And you try to find out what the problem is with the director of finance, it's going to be much more difficult for you to get that sale because you had zero control over the way that that person in front of you responded to the objection that was coming from the director of finance. But the way that I'm teaching you to ask these questions right now is going to allow you to get this information and find out who's going to object, what they're going to object with, and what that person should say to them before it even happens, so you can avoid this problem completely. The last question that I'm going to give you is if you do get a rejection, and all of these questions apply to any industry. If you do get a rejection, one of the smartest questions that you can ask is, okay, well, if you were going to move forward, why would you? I'm going to give you a minute on this one because it's not a typical sales question. I don't really teach typical, and this is really uncomfortable for people to ask because it is so unusual. But the bigger factor of this is that what it does to the customer, their brain switches. So when you're asking them, if you were going to buy my product, why would you? Now think about this. How often do you think any other salesperson asks them this question? Never. Never. But the fact that you're asking it, and you're asking such an unusual question that makes somebody think, is refreshing. And it forces the brain to go in that direction, which is, why would I buy your product or service? Now they just told you, I don't want it. I'm not interested. It's not for me. It's too, whatever. It's too expensive. Whatever the reason is. And then you say, now let's take it into an example. Let's apply this to different industries. So if you sell cars, you could say, okay, no problem. If you were to buy this car though, why would you be buying it? And then just be quiet. Let's say if you work for a bank and you're trying to get somebody to apply for a personal loan and they tell you they don't want it, they don't need it, whatever the case is, and then you say, okay, but if you were to apply for a personal loan, why would you be doing it? Because there's a really good chance that they will say, well, the only reason I might need a personal loan is because I'm thinking about buying this, whatever it is. And then you can get into that discussion with them. If you're in real estate, you could say, okay, I understand you're not ready to purchase right now, but quick question. If you were going to buy this house, or you can ask it in a different way, if you were going to buy any property with me, why would you be doing that? Because they might actually just say something that you didn't know before. They might tell you that, oh, well, I have a lot of properties and I actually really like you, so I'm thinking about buying this instead, but maybe you were pitching them the wrong type of property. So this question will really help you get to information that you would have not gotten before. Now, a follow-up question to that is, again, if you're rejected, the follow-up question you want to ask is, what is it costing you to not move forward? And of course, this will apply to certain industries more than others. So for example, if you're in the digital marketing services and somebody has said like, no, you know what? After learning about your services and your fees, I think we're good with what we're doing now. Then this is a great follow-up question for you to ask. Well, what is it costing you to not move forward with my service, because that's going to allow them to tell you literally how much money they're going to be spending trying to do it themselves, or how much money they're going to be losing by not using your services. And that right there might make them think twice. Okay, maybe I should use their services. Okay. But the whole point of these questions is that you're not telling the client anything. You're asking them very, very smart, open-ended questions to allow them to tell you a lot of information that you need, and to allow them to convince themselves of the things that you want them to be convinced of. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and do that now so you don't miss the next video. I post every week, sales tips and techniques, very unique, very refreshing, a lot of stuff you probably haven't heard before. Not your typical, but very effective, and I'll see you in the next video.